Country Diggers here. Today I'm going to talk about Swilling the Planters. And if you haven't heard of that, you're in for a treat. And it started with bamboo rum from the Caribbean. This one's from Barbados. And it started with this and George Washington. So you got a treat coming. Stay tuned. Politics was little better in colonial America than now. The wealthy curried the favor of voters with rum-fueled voter parties. Bumbo was the rum drink of choice. During election season, the regular folks would say, "They're swilling the planters with Bumbo again." There was a song called "Swilling the Planters," and it's by Tom Arnold, Swilling the Planters with Bumbo. And I'll read the lyrics. Bumbo, that's 2 cubes of sugar, 2 ounces of rum, an ounce of water, a dash of nutmeg, Bumbo. There's a party tonight at Colonel Washington's. The House of Burgess election is nigh. There's a party at Colonel Washington's. The voters are coming. There'll be plenty of rum. Come election time when America was young and the landed gentry held office, they curried the favor of constituents with voter parties fueled by rum in 1758. With Burgess elections in a fortnight, the home of Colonel Washington was open to the voters, who shouted through the night, "They're swilling the planters with Bumbo again. Huzzas to the glory of Washington." The records of Colonel Washington showed 160 gallons of rum for some 391 voters of Frederick County. Now, the last election he had badly lost, but he didn't make the same mistake twice. He hosted a party made with Bumbo with wine. They voted for him with a taste on their tongue. They're swilling the planters with Bumbo again. Huzzas to the glory of Washington. Soon after the election, the House of Burgess passed that no one be qualified to hold a seat who before the election gives meat or drink in order to be elected. There was no further interest in Washington voters, parties, Bumbo, or rum, and he served for 7 years. The party and parties had moved on. They're swilling the planters with Bumbo again. Huzzas to the glory of Washington. So when we see elections are handedly won by candidates who've come to run with war chests of their own, and they dole out millions wooing you and me, and we know they don't pay our rent, just remember how deep this practice runs, how little times have changed. Let's sing the American song. Okay, and now I'll read from the article, which is in the eastportlandblog.com, and it's called Agriculture of the Cocktail, Swilling the Planters with Bumbo. Happy President's Day by Bill Scott. And this was written on February 16th, 2021. Oh, excuse me. In 1755, 23-year-old George Washington decided to run for the Virginia House of Burgess. He chose to take a principled stand and buck the long-standing British election practice of offering free alcohol to voters on Election Day, in essence buying their vote. He believed there were too many taverns in town, and even complained to the Virginia governor that excessive drinking affected the readiness of his soldiers. He was rewarded for his effort by being trounced 40 to 270 in the election. He was a principled man, but he was also a quick learner. The next election, he was prepared. 28 gallons of rum, 50 gallons of rum punch, 34 gallons of wine, 46 gallons of beer, and 2 gallons of cider royal, nearly enough for half a gallon per voter. He received 331 votes, easily defeating his 3 rivals. It was illegal to give voters gifts in exchange for their votes, but there was nothing wrong with having a party. The practice was known as Swilling the Planters with Bumbo. The planters referred to farmers, and as landowners were eligible to vote. And Bumbo was a popular rum drink consisting of rum, lime, sugar, and nutmeg, very popular in taverns of the day, and actually quite tasty. I wouldn't know. There is a long history of the relationship between presidents and alcohol. Some were drunks, some were teetotalers, and some, like Washington, saw the value of the spirit. He not only used it to get elected, but knew of its importance to his men, and fought throughout the Revolutionary War to keep a steady source of rum for his soldiers. After the war, he tried his hand at making whiskey, building a distillery at Mount Vernon. By 1799, he was producing 11,000 gallons of whiskey a year, becoming one of the largest distilleries in America at the time. Even though it is unlikely that he ever drank any of it himself. John Adams was a drinker and started every day with a tankard of hard cider. In the morning, he started in the morning drinking it and enjoyed 3 glasses of Madra, a fortified wine from Portugal, mixed with rum in the evening while he read before bed. And Jefferson, our Francophile president, spent much of the Revolutionary War in France, enjoying the wine, while he defended himself against the charge of being a drunk, claiming he only drank 3 or 4 glasses of wine at dinner. He imported somewhere around 20,000 bottles of French wine during his presidency. This was a time when Americans drank. In 1790, the average American was drinking the equivalent of 5.8 gallons of pure alcohol a year. And by 1830, that number had risen to 7.1 gallons. This is startling compared to today, when we on average consume approximately 2.3 gallons a year. But it really makes your head spin when you realize that women drank very little, so the number for the average male was significantly higher. In the 1800s saw presidents on both sides, both alcoholics and those who avoided strong drink. While Abraham Lincoln chose not to drink, others like Franklin Pierce and Chester Arthur were heavy drinkers. Most of the presidents during this century were fans of whiskey. Jackson, Van Buren, Taylor, Johnson, and beer, Garfield and Cleveland, wine, sherry, and champagne, Mason Monroe, and John Quincy Adams, Tyler, Polk, Fillmore, and Buchanan. But Pierce and Arthur were known to drink everything. It is said that Arthur drank a deal. It is said that Arthur drank to deal with the loss of his wife, but Pierce, possibly our drunkest president, drank himself to death at age 65. He said once after leaving office, "What can an ex-president of the United States do after leaving office except get drunk?" Well, they should have had them give speeches now. Give them millions of dollars to do a speech like they do now, instead of having them as drunks. But anyway, the century aligns with the history of the spirit, more or less. The first part of the era is loaded with bottles bottled wines and champagnes, but as American whiskey begins to come into its own, the whiskey drinkers become more prevalent. Beer doesn't appear until the end of the century, as production of beer becomes much more refined and the products become much better. The next century added the cocktail of the drinking habits of the presidents. William McKinley, the last president of the 1800s, and serving until he was assassinated in September of 1901, is the only president with a cocktail named after him that is worth mentioning. McKinley's Delight, consisting of 2 ounces of rye, 1 ounce sweet vermouth, 2 dashes of cherry brandy, and 1 dash of absinthe. It was very popular at the time, right as the golden era of the cocktail was at its peak. Teddy Roosevelt was not a fan of hard liquor and drank no more than half a dozen mint juleps a year. After leaving office, he even sued a newspaper that claimed he was a drunk. His first cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, however, is perhaps the president we associated the most with the cocktail. He ran for president on a platform of Indian prohibition, which he did, and uttered that now famous line, "What America needs now is a drink." While Anheuser-Busch put together a ceremonial team of Clydesdale horses, the first use of those familiar animals, to deliver some of the first legal cases of beer to the White House. And Youngling Brewery sent an entire shipload of his favorite beer to him to say thanks. FDR was a cocktail guy. FDR was a cocktail guy. He was fond of the dirty gin martinis and whiskey Manhattans. During World War II, Roosevelt would meet with Winston Churchill at the White House, and the two would stay up all night drinking and smoking cigars. The White House staff referred to these benders as Winston hours. Despite his reputation for drinking cocktails, Roosevelt was not a heavy drinker, and he would end up sleeping for 10 hours a night for 3 nights in a row to recover once Churchill left. Wow. The rest of the presidents either drank little or nothing. Carter, Bush Jr., Trump, Biden drank primarily beer. Obama, Scotch and whiskey. Eisenhower, Johnson, and Nixon. No. Forgive me. Carter, Bush Jr., Trump, and Biden drank very little or nothing. Drank primarily. Obama drank beer or Scotch whiskey. Eisenhower, Johnson, Nixon drank Scotch whiskey. That's confusing right there. The exceptions were Gerald Ford, Harry Truman, and John Kennedy. Ford was a fan of the 3 martini lunch, at least until he was thrust into the presidency. But Truman loved the hard stuff, and the harder the better. His drink was a bourbon old-fashioned, but he liked it strong and would complain to the White House staff if it was too weak. He was also known to knock back a shot of bourbon in the morning as well. Kennedy was a fan of flavorful mixed drinks. He loved a Bloody Mary and was particularly partial to Jackie's daiquiris. Sadly, it was made from lemonade concentrate, and she tacked the recipe to the kitchen wall for the staff to follow. Seriously, lemonade. Cheers. Okay, that was all. Hope y'all enjoyed. That was something a little different. Different than I usually come across, I think. But hope y'all enjoyed. See you back soon. Bye.